My name is Norman, and I am 58 years old. After 35 years as a construction engineer, I finally retired to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I had worked tirelessly to provide for my family, especially my daughter Jessica. When she announced her lavish Paris wedding, I happily offered to contribute $180,000. Then came that devastating text message, "Dad, it would be better if you didn't attend. You don't speak French and it would embarrass Antoine's family." The pain cut deep, but I refused to be both used and discarded. If you're watching this from somewhere family still means respect and appreciation, drop a comment and hit subscribe. My story will show you how I reclaimed my dignity after my own daughter deemed me unworthy. Growing up, Jessica was my little princess. I still remember the day I taught her to ride a bike without training wheels. She was 7 years old, with pigtails bouncing as she pedaled down our suburban driveway. When she finally made it to the end, without falling, her face lit up with such pride that I knew I would do anything to see that smile again. "Daddy, did you see I did it all by myself?" she had exclaimed, her front tooth missing and her eyes sparkling with achievement. "I sure did, sweetheart. You were amazing," I had replied, my chest swelling with pride. Those were the golden days of our relationship. Every weekend we had our special routines. On Saturdays I would take her fishing at Lake Monroe. Jessica never had the patience to actually catch anything, but she loved our conversations as we sat on the dock with our feet dangling in the cool water. On Sundays we would make pancakes together, Jessica insisting on adding chocolate chips and whipped cream that would inevitably end up more on her face than in her mouth. As Jessica entered her teen years, our bond remained strong. I attended every school play, every debate competition, every award ceremony. When she played Juliet in her high school production of Romeo and Juliet, I sat in the front row, fighting back tears of pride as she delivered her lines flawlessly. My work as a construction engineer wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to provide Jessica with opportunities I never had. I worked on major projects throughout the Midwest, often enduring long hours in scorching heat or freezing cold. The physical toll was substantial. My back still aches when it rains, but knowing I was securing Jessica's future made every moment of discomfort worthwhile. When Jessica expressed interest in attending a prestigious private school known for its excellent college preparation, I didn't hesitate. The tuition was steep, $24,000 a year, but I picked up extra projects and weekend work to make it happen. I still remember her jumping up and down when she received her acceptance letter. "Dad, this changes everything. I can actually apply to Ivy League schools now," she had exclaimed, hugging me tightly. Those overtime hours meant missing some of her performances and competitions, but Jessica seemed to understand. "It's okay, Dad," she would say. "I know you're doing it for me." Things began to change when Jessica's mother, Barbara, and I divorced. Jessica was 16, old enough to understand, but young enough to be deeply affected. Barbara and I had grown apart over the years, our dreams and expectations diverging, until we barely recognized the people we had become. The split was relatively amicable, but it created a fracture in our family structure that would later widen into a chasm. Within a year of our divorce, Barbara married Richard, a successful investment banker whose income dwarfed mine. Suddenly, Jessica was splitting time between my modest 4-bedroom house in the suburbs and Richard's lakefront mansion, complete with an indoor pool and home theater. I started noticing subtle changes in Jessica's attitude and expectations. "Dad, why do we always have to shop at regular stores? Richard takes Mom to boutiques where they know her by name," she commented during our back-to-school shopping trip. "Because regular stores have perfectly good clothes at reasonable prices, Jess," I had replied, trying not to let her comment sting. Despite these occasional remarks, Jessica still seemed to appreciate our relationship. When she was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. I had been saving for her education since she was born, setting aside a portion of every paycheck into a 529 plan. Between the scholarship and my savings, we could cover the costs without loans. "Dad, I couldn't have done this without you," Jessica had said during her high school graduation dinner. "You always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Those words had meant everything to me. Throughout my career, I approached finances conservatively. While colleagues bought new cars or went on exotic vacations, I drove the same reliable Ford F-150 for 15 years and limited my vacations to affordable destinations within driving distance. My coworkers often teased me about my frugal habits. "Norman, you know you can't take it with you, right?" My friend Gary would joke when I brought lunch from home instead of joining them at restaurants. "It's not for me," I would always reply. "It's for Jessica's future." Every financial decision I made was with Jessica in mind. When I received promotions or bonuses, the extra money went straight into her college fund or my retirement account, which I secretly thought of as Jessica's emergency fund if she ever needed it. I wanted to ensure she would never have to struggle the way I had in my early years. Looking back, perhaps I should have seen the warning signs, the increasing comments about how other parents provided for their children, the growing embarrassment about my profession and our lifestyle, the subtle shifts in her language and priorities as she moved through college and beyond. But love can be blind, especially a parent's love. I was so focused on providing for Jessica's material needs that I failed to notice how her values were changing. I was proud of her academic achievements and career aspirations, never realizing that with each step up the social ladder she was leaving behind, the appreciation for the sacrifice and hard work that had gotten her there. By the time Jessica graduated from Northwestern with honors, the transformation was well underway. But I was still her proud father, standing and cheering louder than anyone when she walked across that stage. I had no idea that within a few years my role would change from cherished father to embarrassing liability, one whose presence would be deemed inappropriate at his own daughter's wedding. The first time Jessica mentioned Antoine was during her semester abroad in Paris during her junior year of college. What started as casual references soon became the centerpiece of our weekly video calls. "Dad, I met someone," she told me, her face glowing on my laptop screen. "His name is Antoine Laurent, and he is studying international relations at Sciences Po." "That's great, honey," I responded, genuinely happy to see her excitement. "Tell me about him." "He's amazing, Dad. His family has this beautiful apartment near the Luxembourg Gardens, and they have a country estate in Provence. His father is some kind of diplomat, and his mother comes from an old French family with a title and everything." I remember feeling a slight unease at how much of her description focused on Antoine's family wealth and status rather than his character or how he treated her. But I chalked it up to the natural excitement of experiencing a different culture and lifestyle. Over the next few months, Jessica's appearance and mannerisms began to change subtly. Her once casual American style gave way to carefully curated outfits that looked straight out of a French fashion magazine. She began wearing her hair in a sleek bob instead of her usual ponytail, and I noticed she was wearing makeup even for our casual Sunday morning video calls. More concerning was the way she started peppering her speech with French phrases, often without translating them. When I would ask what she meant, she would sigh and explain as if to a child. "It's just the way people speak here, Dad. Some things just sound better in French, you know." No, I didn't know, but I wanted to be supportive, so I nodded and smiled. After completing her semester abroad, Jessica returned to Northwestern to finish her degree, but she and Antoine maintained their relationship long distance. They talked daily, and Jessica began planning trips back to France during school breaks instead of coming home. When Jessica graduated, she announced her plan to move to Paris permanently. Antoine has connections who can help me get a job at an international firm there, she explained. 6 months after her move, Jessica called with news that Antoine would be visiting the United States and wanted to meet me. I was thrilled and immediately began preparing for his visit. I cleaned my house thoroughly, bought new sheets for the guest room, and even stocked my fridge with what I imagined were French staples, cheese wine, and fancy mineral water. Antoine arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. He was tall and slim with carefully styled dark hair and wore a blazer even though it was nearly 85 degrees outside. His handshake was firm but brief, and while he was unfailingly polite, there was a distance to his interactions that made me feel like I was being evaluated rather than met. "Your home is very comfortable, Mr. Williams," he commented as Jessica gave him the tour. The slight pause before comfortable spoke volumes. Throughout his 3-day stay, Jessica seemed on edge, constantly watching my interactions with Antoine, as if afraid I might embarrass her. When I offered to grill steaks for dinner, Jessica quickly interjected. "Antoine prefers his meat very rare, Dad. Maybe we should go out instead." Her tone carried a hint of apology, not to me, but to Antoine for my pedestrian cooking skills. During dinner at the local steakhouse, a place I had always considered quite nice, Jessica repeatedly apologized for the simple American food and the casual atmosphere. Antoine nodded understandingly, as if graciously enduring a hardship. On their final evening, as we sat in my living room with after-dinner drinks, Antoine cleared his throat and formally addressed me. "Mr. Williams, as you may have guessed, Jessica and I have become quite serious about our relationship." He began, his English perfect but accented. "I have asked her to marry me and she has done me the honor of accepting." Jessica thrust out her hand to display a diamond ring that must have cost more than my annual salary. "Isn't it beautiful, Dad? It's been in Antoine's family for generations." "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely happy for her despite my reservations about Antoine. "Congratulations to both of you." "We plan to have the wedding next summer," Antoine continued, "at my family's estate just outside Paris. It has been the site of Laurent family weddings for over 200 years. "It's going to be magical, Dad," Jessica gushed. "The estate has its own chapel, and there's this gorgeous garden where we'll have the reception. Antoine's parents are inviting everyone who matters in Paris society." I nodded, trying to picture myself in such a setting. "Sounds fancy. I better dust off my tuxedo." Jessica and Antoine exchanged a look that made my stomach tighten. "Actually, Dad," Jessica said carefully, "we were hoping you might be willing to help with the wedding costs. Antoine's parents are handling the venue since they own it, but there are still many expenses. The catering alone is going to be around $50,000. I blinked, taken aback by both the amount and the request. "That's quite a lot for food, Jess." "It's not just food, Dad," Jessica replied, a touch of irritation in her voice. "It's a 5-star experience with a renowned French chef. This wedding will have government ministers and family friends who own major companies. Everything has to be perfect." Antoine placed his hand over Jessica's in what seemed like a rehearsed gesture. "What Jessica is trying to say, Mr. Williams, is that we were hoping for your financial contribution, perhaps around $180,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was a significant portion of my retirement savings. "We know it's a lot," Jessica hurried to add, seeing my expression. "But it would mean everything to me, Dad. This is my special day, and it would be your contribution since, well..." "Since what?" I asked, already dreading her answer. "Since there isn't much else you can contribute to a traditional French wedding," she finished, not meeting my eyes. In that moment, I should have seen what was happening. I should have recognized the implications in her words. But all I could think about was my daughter's happiness, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about this wedding. Despite the knot in my stomach, I found myself nodding. "I'll make it work, Jess. If this is what you want, I'll find a way." The smile that broke across her face almost made the financial anxiety worthwhile. Almost. "Thank you, Daddy," she exclaimed, using the childhood term of endearment she had abandoned years ago. "This means everything to me." As I lay in bed that night after they had gone to sleep, I calculated what this would mean for my future. I would need to withdraw from my retirement accounts facing penalties and taxes. I would need to postpone my retirement plans by at least 5 years. I would need to cancel the fishing boat I had been saving for as a retirement gift to myself. But for Jessica, I told myself it would be worth it. After all, what was money compared to my only daughter's happiness? What was financial security compared to giving her the wedding of her dreams? I had no idea that I wasn't just paying for a wedding. I was purchasing my own exclusion from it. 6 months before the wedding, Jessica insisted I needed to visit Paris to meet Antoine's family and see the wedding venue. Despite the expense of an international trip on top of the wedding contribution, I agreed, excited to be part of the planning process. The Laurent family estate was even more impressive than Jessica had described. Located in a wealthy suburb of Paris, it was a sprawling property centered around an 18th-century chateau with manicured gardens and a private chapel. The kind of place you see in movies or read about in history books, not somewhere a construction engineer from the American Midwest typically finds himself. Antoine's parents greeted me with formal politeness that never quite warmed into genuine welcome. Bernard Laurent was a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and an impeccable suit. His wife Genevieve was elegant and slim, her subtle designer clothing and minimal jewelry speaking of old money and refined taste. "We are pleased to finally meet Jessica's father," Bernard said, his handshake brief. "Antoine has told us much about you." Something about his tone made me doubt those conversations had been flattering. Over the next few days, I was included in some family meals but excluded from most of the wedding planning discussions, which were conducted primarily in rapid French, despite everyone's perfect English capabilities. When I asked Jessica about this, she brushed off my concerns. "They just naturally slip into French when discussing details, Dad. It's not personal." But it felt personal when Bernard would make comments during dinner that, while not explicitly rude, carried clear implications. "In France, we value tradition and cultural refinement above all," he remarked one evening. "It is different from America, where I understand the focus is more on material success and efficiency." "Dad builds beautiful structures," Jessica said, in what I initially took as a defense but quickly realized was an attempt to reframe my career in terms the Laurents might respect. "Some of his projects have won architectural awards." "Ah, so you are an architect?" Genevieve asked, showing interest for the first time. "No, I'm a construction engineer," I clarified. "I make sure the architect's visions are structurally sound and can actually be built." "I see," she replied, her renewed disinterest palpable. "So you work with your hands?" Jessica laughed nervously. "Dad has always been good at practical things." The conversation moved on, but the message was clear. In the Laurent family's hierarchy of value, my profession ranked low. Throughout the visit, Bernard made several comments about American culture that ranged from dismissive to outright contemptuous. "American wine is for people who cannot appreciate the subtleties of French vineyards," he stated during one meal, though I had never mentioned any interest in wine. "American education focuses too much on confidence and not enough on actual knowledge," he remarked another time, despite knowing nothing about my educational background. What hurt most was not Bernard's comments, but Jessica's reaction to them. Rather than defending her heritage, our heritage, she would nod in agreement, or worse, laugh along. It was as if she were eager to distance herself from her American upbringing, from me. The final evening of my visit, a dinner was held with some of Antoine's extended family. The entire conversation was in French, with no attempts to translate for me. I sat silently for over 2 hours, smiling politely and feeling increasingly invisible. When I excused myself briefly to use the restroom, I overheard Bernard speaking to an elderly relative in the hallway. "Yes, he is paying for most of it," Bernard was saying in English, clearly discussing me. "It is the least he can do, given that he has nothing else to contribute. You know how these Americans are. Money is their only culture." I froze, hurt, and anger washing over me in equal measure. I wanted to confront him, to defend myself, to remind him that this uncultured American was funding the lavish wedding he was so proud to host. But I said nothing, retreating to the bathroom to compose myself. When I returned to the table, I caught Jessica's eye. Something in my expression must have conveyed my distress, because she briefly looked concerned before turning back to the conversation without a word. The next morning, as I prepared to return to the United States, Jessica handed me a list of payment deadlines for various wedding vendors. "The first installment for the catering is due next week," she explained. "About $30,000. The florist needs a deposit of $15,000 the week after. I've emailed you the wire transfer details." I nodded, trying to ignore the feeling that I had been invited to Paris, not as the father of the bride, but as a walking checkbook. On the flight home, I made a decision. If I was going to be part of this wedding in any meaningful way, I needed to make more of an effort to fit in. Perhaps if I learned some French, I could bridge the cultural gap that seemed to be widening between Jessica and me. As soon as I returned home, I enrolled in evening French classes at the local community college and hired a tutor for additional practice. At 58, learning a new language wasn't easy. My pronunciation was clumsy, and memorizing vocabulary took far more repetition than it would have in my younger years. But I persisted, spending hours each night studying and practicing, determined to surprise Jessica with at least basic French conversation skills by the time of the wedding. My tutor, Madame Rosalie, was patient and encouraging. "Your dedication is impressive, Norman," she told me after a particularly frustrating session where I couldn't master the French R sound. "Many of my students give up when it gets difficult, but you keep trying." "It's for my daughter," I explained. "I want to be able to say at least a few words in French at her wedding." Madame Rosalie smiled sympathetically. "That is a beautiful gift you are trying to give her." If only Jessica had seen it that way. Meanwhile, I continued to make the payments Jessica requested. Each wire transfer diminished my savings, but I consoled myself with thoughts of Jessica's happiness on her wedding day. I imagined standing proudly as father of the bride, perhaps even giving a short speech in my newly acquired French. In the midst of all this, the actual wedding plans continued without my input. Jessica would call occasionally to update me, but the conversations were brief and one-sided. "The florist is bringing in orchids from Thailand," she would announce, or "Antoine's mother found the perfect vintage champagne for the toast." When I asked about more personal aspects, who would be walking her down the aisle, what music would be played, whether there would be any nods to our family traditions, Jessica was vague and dismissive. "It's all being handled, Dad. The wedding planner knows what works best for this type of event." This type of event seemed code for something too sophisticated for you to understand. Despite these warning signs, I continued to hope that once the wedding day arrived, the focus would return to what mattered: family love and the celebration of Jessica and Antoine's commitment to each other. I convinced myself that the cultural differences and social pretensions would fade in the face of such universal human emotions. I was wrong. So very wrong. 4 weeks before the wedding, I was at home reviewing some French vocabulary when my phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. I smiled, assuming it was another update about wedding details or perhaps a question about my travel arrangements. The message I read stopped my heart. Dad Antoine and I have been talking with his parents, and we think it would be best if you didn't attend the wedding in person. Most of the guests will be speaking French, and we're concerned you would feel uncomfortable and out of place. You've already contributed so much financially, and we don't want to put you through an awkward situation. We'll send plenty of photos and maybe have a small celebration when we visit the States next year. Love you. I stared at the message, reading it over and over, certain I must be misunderstanding. They couldn't possibly be uninviting me from my own daughter's wedding. Not after I had committed $180,000. Not after I had spent months learning French. Not after everything. With shaking hands, I called Jessica. The call went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. I sent a text, "Please call me. We need to talk about your message." 20 agonizing minutes later, my phone rang. "Hi, Dad," Jessica said, her voice artificially bright. "Did you get my text?" "I got it," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." There was a pause before Jessica responded, her tone now carefully measured. "It's not a mistake, Dad. We've given it a lot of thought, and we really believe this is the best solution for everyone." How can excluding the father of the bride from the wedding be the best solution for anyone? I asked, disbelief giving way to anger. "I'm paying for this wedding, Jessica. I've been learning French for months to try to fit in with Antoine's family." "You're learning French?" Jessica sounded genuinely surprised. "That's sweet, Dad, but it's not just about the language. It's about fitting in with the whole atmosphere. The wedding is going to have several government ministers, some minor royalty from Belgium, and a lot of Antoine's parents' social circle. It's a very specific type of event. And I'm not good enough for this specific type of event." "Is that what you're saying?" Jessica sighed. "Don't put it like that. You're taking this too personally." "Too personally, Jessica, you're my daughter. Your wedding is about as personal as it gets for me." "Look, Dad." Her voice took on a slightly condescending tone that reminded me eerily of Bernard. "You've always said you want me to be happy. This is what would make the day go smoothly. Antoine's parents are concerned that having someone there who doesn't understand the culture or speak the language might create awkward situations." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This isn't your decision, is it? This is coming from Bernard and Genevieve. "It was a mutual decision," Jessica insisted, but her slight hesitation told me otherwise. "Put Antoine on the phone," I demanded. After a moment, Antoine's voice came through. "Mr. Williams, I understand this is difficult." "Do you?" I interrupted. "Do you understand what it means to tell a father he's not welcome at his daughter's wedding, a wedding he's paying for? The financial contribution is separate from the guest list," Antoine replied coolly. "We are grateful for your generosity, but the ceremony needs to maintain a certain cohesion." "Cohesion? You mean social status? You're embarrassed by me." "That is not—" Before he could finish, I heard Bernard's voice in the background, followed by some rapid French exchanges. Then Bernard himself came on the line. "Mr. Williams," he said, his tone managing to be both formal and dismissive. "I feel I should explain the situation clearly, since there seems to be some misunderstanding." "Please do," I replied, my knuckles white around the phone. "Our family has a certain position in French society. This wedding will be attended by people of significant influence and cultural refinement. The event has specific protocols and expectations that would be challenging for someone unfamiliar with our customs. I'm not asking to give a speech in French or lead a traditional dance, I argued. I just want to be at my daughter's wedding, to walk her down the aisle, to be her father. Bernard made a sound that might have been sympathy, but felt more like pity. I understand American weddings are more informal, but here everything must be perfect. No awkwardness, no cultural missteps. Surely you want what is best for Jessica's special day. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. What I want is to be treated with basic respect and dignity, especially by my own daughter. Dad. Jessica was back on the line, her voice pleading. Please try to understand. This isn't personal. But it was. It was the most personal rejection I had ever experienced. You need to make a choice right now, Jessica. I said, my voice low and controlled despite the storm raging inside me. Either I am welcome at this wedding as your father, with all the respect and dignity that role deserves, or you need to find another way to pay for it. There was a long silence before Jessica spoke again. Dad, you don't mean that. You wouldn't take back your promise about the money. You know how important this wedding is to me. Her words cut deeper than she could possibly know. She was right, I had never broken a promise to her before. But then again, she had never treated me like an embarrassment to be hidden away. Think about what you're doing, Jessica, I said quietly. Think about what kind of person you're becoming. I'm becoming someone who belongs in this world, she replied, her voice hardening. Maybe if Mom had stayed with you, I would have been happy with a backyard wedding in Indiana. But I've seen what else is out there, Dad. I've found where I fit. At the expense of the person who sacrificed everything to get you there. I said the truth of it, landing heavily between us. You always said you wanted me to have a better life than you did, Jessica countered. Well, this is it. This is that better life. After we hung up, I sat in my darkened living room for hours staring at nothing. The pain was physical, a crushing weight on my chest that made it difficult to breathe. My daughter, my Jessica, was ashamed of me. All those years of work, of sacrifice, of putting her needs and dreams first, and this was where it had led. To being explicitly told I wasn't good enough to attend her wedding, despite funding it entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went through old photo albums instead, tracing Jessica's growth from a gap-toothed child to a confident young woman. What had happened to that sweet girl who once looked at me like I hung the moon? When had money and status become more important than love and respect? By morning, something had shifted inside me. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a quiet, steady resolve. I had spent my entire adult life sacrificing my own needs and dignity for Jessica's benefit. But there had to be a limit. There had to be a point where self-respect took precedence. That morning, I decided I had reached that point. The day after being uninvited from the wedding, I called my attorney, Frank Daniels, who had handled my divorce and other legal matters over the years. Norman, good to hear from you, Frank greeted me warmly. What can I do for you today? I need some advice about a large financial commitment I've made. I explained, then detailed the situation with Jessica Antoine and the wedding payments. Frank listened without interrupting, though I could hear his occasional sighs of disbelief. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Let me make sure I understand correctly, Frank finally said. You committed to paying approximately $180,000 for your daughter's wedding in France. You've already made some payments. Now they've uninvited you from the wedding itself, but still expect you to cover all costs. That's the situation, I confirmed. Frank's tone hardened. Norman, I'm speaking not just as your attorney, but as your friend. This is outrageous, absolutely outrageous. What are my options legally? I asked. Well, the good news is that you're in a stronger position than you might think, Frank explained. You mentioned the contracts with the vendors are in your name, correct? Yes, Jessica had me sign everything directly since I'm the one paying. That works in your favor. As the contracting party, you have the right to modify or cancel those agreements according to their terms. Have you paid the full amount yet? No, about 40% so far. The biggest payments are scheduled for the next few weeks. Frank tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. Here's what we can do. I'll review all the contracts to understand the cancellation terms. Most will have provisions for partial refunds depending on timing. You might lose some deposits, but it's better than paying the full amount for a wedding you're not welcome to attend. The decisiveness in Frank's voice gave me confidence. So I can legally back out. Absolutely. These aren't gifts you've made. They're contractual obligations that you entered into with the understanding you'd be part of the event. The change in circumstances gives you solid ground to withdraw. After our call, I forwarded all the contract documents to Frank, who promised to review them immediately. True to his word, he called me back the next morning. I've gone through everything, he said. You can cancel most of these contracts with minimal penalties if you act within the next week. The catering deposit is non-refundable, but that's a small fraction of the total. The remaining installments can be canceled without penalty. I took a deep breath. Then that's what I want to do. Are you sure, Norman? This will likely cause a permanent rift with your daughter. The question gave me pause. Was I ready to potentially lose my relationship with Jessica over this? But then I remembered the cold dismissal in her voice, the casual way she and the Laurents had decided I wasn't worthy of attending, despite funding the entire affair. The rift already exists, Frank. I'm just acknowledging it. With Frank's guidance, I began the process of canceling payments and contracts. Each email I sent, each call I made was both painful and liberating. I was breaking my promise to Jessica, something I had never done before. But I was also standing up for myself, refusing to be both financially exploited and personally discarded. While dealing with the logistics, I sought emotional support from my family and close friends. My first call was to my brother Robert. They did what? Robert exclaimed after I explained the situation. You're paying for the whole thing, and they don't want you there. That's not just rude, Norman. That's cruel. I know, I sighed. I keep wondering if I missed something, if there were signs I should have seen earlier. This isn't on you, Robert insisted. Jessica's changed, and not for the better. Money and status have gone to her head. You did nothing wrong except maybe love her too much and ask too little in return. My sister Linda was equally supportive. You've always put that girl first, Norman. Everything you've ever done has been with her best interests at heart. For her to treat you this way is unforgivable. Most surprisingly, my ex-wife's sister Caroline reached out after hearing about the situation from Linda. I wanted you to know that not everyone in Barbara's family agrees with what Jessica is doing, Caroline told me. Barbara might be encouraging this behavior because of Richard's influence, but I think it's shameful. You were always a good father, Norman. You deserve better than this. These conversations strengthened my resolve. I wasn't crazy or overreacting. The treatment I had received was genuinely unacceptable. As I worked through the practical aspects of withdrawing my financial support, I also struggled with the emotional fallout. There were moments of doubt nights when I lay awake wondering if I was making a terrible mistake that would cost me my daughter forever. But those moments were balanced by a growing sense of self-respect that had been missing for too long. I decided to write Jessica a letter explaining my decision. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter that required thought and care. I worked on it for days, writing and rewriting, trying to find the right balance between expressing my hurt and maintaining my dignity. The final version read, Dear Jessica, by the time you receive this letter, you will likely have already heard from the wedding vendors about the canceled payments. I want you to understand why I've made this difficult decision. Throughout your life, I have tried to give you everything within my power. I worked long hours, saved carefully, and prioritized your dreams above my own. I did this gladly out of love for you. Not once did I ever think of these sacrifices as burdens. When you asked me to contribute to your wedding, I agreed without hesitation, even though it meant postponing my retirement and using savings I had set aside for my later years. Again, I did this out of love, wanting your special day to be everything you dreamed. But a parent's love should not come at the cost of their dignity. Being told I am not welcome at an event I am funding, being essentially told that my money is valued, but my presence is not, crosses a line I cannot accept. It diminishes not only me, but also the values I tried to instill in you: respect, gratitude, and the understanding that a person's worth is not determined by their social status or cultural background. This decision has been agonizing. I have always kept my promises to you, and breaking this one causes me profound pain. But continuing to fund a celebration from which I am explicitly excluded would be an act of self-erasure I cannot commit. I will always be your father, and I will always love you. My door remains open if you wish to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect. But that cannot happen while I am treated as an ATM rather than a parent. I hope that someday you will understand that this action comes not from a place of anger, but from the necessity of self-respect. Love always, Dad. After mailing the letter, I felt a strange sense of peace mixed with profound sadness. I had done what I needed to do. Now I had to prepare for the consequences. The storm broke 3 days after I mailed my letter to Jessica and officially canceled the remaining wedding payments. I was having breakfast when my phone exploded with notifications, texts, missed calls, voicemails, all arriving within minutes of each other. The first call I returned was from Jessica. I braced myself before pressing the call button. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed as soon as she picked up. "My wedding is in less than a month, and you just canceled everything. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I know exactly what I've done," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I refused to be used." "Used?" Jessica's voice rose even higher. "I'm your daughter. Parents are supposed to help with their children's weddings. It's what normal families do. Normal families also invite parents to those weddings," I pointed out. "They don't exclude them for not being sophisticated enough." "This isn't about sophistication," Jessica protested. "It's about what works for the event. You're being selfish and vindictive." "No, Jessica. I'm finally standing up for myself. For years, I've put your needs and wants ahead of everything else in my life. But being asked to pay for a wedding I'm not allowed to attend crosses a line." "We invited you at first," she argued. "We only suggested you not come when we realized how uncomfortable it would be for everyone." "Uncomfortable for whom?" "For Antoine's family, who might be embarrassed by your working-class father. For you, who's apparently ashamed of where you come from. That's not fair. What's not fair is being told I'm good enough to write checks, but not good enough to stand beside my daughter on one of the most important days of her life." And our conversation deteriorated from there, with Jessica alternating between anger, manipulation, and finally threats. "Antoine's father is consulting their lawyers," she informed me coldly. "What you've done could be considered breach of contract. They might sue you for the full amount plus damages." "Let them try," I replied, bolstered by Frank's legal advice. "The contracts were in my name and most have specific cancellation clauses I've followed to the letter." When it became clear I wouldn't budge, Jessica played her final card. "If you don't fix this immediately, don't expect to ever be part of my life again." Despite anticipating this threat, hearing it still felt like a physical blow, but I held firm. "I love you, Jessica. I always will. But I won't be treated this way, not even by you. When you're ready to have a relationship based on mutual respect, my door is open." The call ended with Jessica hanging up on me. Within hours, the campaign expanded. Antoine called next, his usual politeness replaced with cold fury. "You have embarrassed us in front of our entire social circle," he said without preamble. "Do you know how it looks to have vendors suddenly calling about canceled payments? My parents have had to explain to their friends that the wedding must be postponed." "That sounds difficult," I replied, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in my voice. "Almost as difficult as being told you're not welcome at your daughter's wedding." "This vindictive behavior only proves we were right about your unsuitability," Antoine snapped. "If standing up for my dignity makes me unsuitable for your world, I'm fine with that assessment." Bernard's call was next, and it was the most direct. "You have made a serious mistake," he informed me, his accent thicker than usual with anger. "This will not end well for you." "It already hasn't ended well for me," I responded. "My daughter has chosen status and money over our relationship. We have connections you cannot imagine," Bernard threatened. "In business and law. You will regret this decision." "I've spent months regretting my decision to fund this wedding in the first place. This feels like correction, not regret." After Bernard came a call from my ex-wife, Barbara. Her voice was tightly controlled but vibrating with anger. "What the hell are you thinking? Norman, Jessica is devastated. The Laurents are furious. Do you have any idea the position you've put everyone in?" "I've been thinking about my own position for once," I replied. "About being expected to hand over my retirement savings for an event I'm explicitly uninvited from." "Of course they uninvited you. What did you expect? You don't speak French. You don't understand their customs. You'd be completely out of place. Jessica was trying to spare you the embarrassment." "Spare me?" I laughed without humor. She was sparing herself the embarrassment of having her blue-collar father in the same room as all her fancy new connections. "You're being childish and vindictive," Barbara snapped. "Jessica has a chance at a wonderful life with Antoine, and you're jeopardizing that because your feelings are hurt." "This isn't about hurt feelings. It's about basic respect." "Respect?" Barbara scoffed. "What do you know about respect? You worked construction your whole life. The Laurents move in diplomatic circles. Of course there's a mismatch. A mature person would recognize that and step aside gracefully." Her words confirmed what I had long suspected. Barbara shared Jessica's embarrassment about my background and profession. Perhaps she had even encouraged it over the years. "Stepping aside gracefully doesn't mean paying for the privilege of being excluded," I said firmly. "Jessica and the Laurents want a wedding I'm not good enough to attend. They can pay for it themselves." The barrage of calls continued throughout the day. Antoine's mother left a voicemail in French that I couldn't understand, but whose tone needed no translation. Jessica's college friends sent accusatory texts. Even a few of my own relatives questioned my decision, suggesting I should put Jessica's happiness above my pride. The pressure was intense, but underneath the stress and pain I felt something unexpected, a growing sense of peace. For perhaps the first time in decades, I was prioritizing my own dignity and self-respect. The cost was enormous, potentially, my relationship with my only child, but the alternative had become unthinkable. I could not continue to be someone whose value was measured solely by their financial contributions rather than their humanity. Through it all, I held on to the support of those who understood: Robert and Linda, my faithful siblings; Frank, whose legal expertise gave me confidence; and surprisingly, a few of Jessica's childhood friends who reached out privately to express their concern about how she had changed. "The Jessica I grew up with would never have treated you this way," her former best friend Megan told me during a supportive phone call. "I've been worried about her for years, watching how she's changed. This isn't your fault, Mr. Williams. A week after the cancellations, the immediate storm had passed, replaced by a heavy, painful silence. Jessica stopped calling. The threats of lawsuits never materialized, likely because Frank had been right about my legal standing. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that the wedding had been postponed and significantly scaled down. The Laurents, for all their talk of influence and wealth, had apparently been unwilling or unable to replace my contribution. The silence from Jessica hurt more than the anger had. It suggested that without my financial support, I truly had no value to her. The realization was bitter, but it also confirmed that I had made the right decision. If our relationship could not survive my insistence on basic dignity, then perhaps it had been broken for longer than I'd realized. During those quiet weeks, I experienced both the deepest pain and the beginnings of an unexpected liberation. I had built my entire adult life around Jessica's needs and future. Now I was forced to confront a question I had never seriously considered. What did I want for myself? The answer didn't come quickly or easily. But as days turned into weeks, I began to explore possibilities beyond my identity as Jessica's father and provider. I joined a local fishing club I'd always been too busy for. I reconnected with old friends from my early career days. I even signed up for a weekend woodworking class, something I'd always enjoyed, but rarely had time to pursue. Gradually, painfully, I was rebuilding my life, not as Jessica's father first and foremost, but as Norman Williams, a man with his own value, interests, and dignity. The wedding that was supposed to unite our family had torn it apart instead. But from that rupture, something new and unexpected was slowly emerging, my long-neglected sense of self-worth. 6 months passed without a word from Jessica. The wedding, according to mutual acquaintances, had eventually taken place in a much smaller venue with far fewer guests. The Laurents had apparently told their social circle that the change was due to Antoine and Jessica's desire for greater intimacy, rather than admitting the financial reality. During those months, I went through phases of grief, anger, guilt, and finally a tentative acceptance. I had come to understand that while I couldn't control Jessica's choices or how she viewed me, I could control how I lived my own life going forward. I began traveling modest trips, at first weekend drives, to neighboring states to see natural wonders I'd always put off visiting. Then, in a move that surprised even myself, I booked a 2-week tour of Italy. Not France, I wasn't ready for those associations, but a country whose art history and food had always interested me. The trip was transformative. Away from familiar surroundings and routines, I discovered aspects of myself I had neglected for decades. I enjoyed conversations with fellow travelers without worrying about getting back to work. I spent hours in museums appreciating beauty without calculating costs. I ate leisurely meals without checking my phone for messages from Jessica or work emergencies. Upon returning home, I joined several community groups, a book club at the local library, a volunteer organization that built houses for veterans, and in a move that felt both ironic and healing, a conversation group for people learning French. My initial motivation for studying the language had been Jessica's wedding, but I found I enjoyed the intellectual challenge and the window into a different culture. Through these activities, I developed new friendships. Some were with people my age also navigating major life transitions. Others were with younger folks who seemed to value my experience and perspective. For the first time in years, I was building connections based on shared interests rather than family obligations or work responsibilities. One cool October morning, 6 months after what should have been Jessica's wedding day, I was having coffee on my back deck when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar international number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello, Dad." Jessica's voice sounded small and uncertain, so different from the angry accusations of our last conversation. "Jessica, I said, my heart racing despite my attempts to stay calm. Are you okay? I don't know, she replied, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. Things aren't going well here. I waited, letting the silence encourage her to continue. Antoine and I have been fighting a lot, she finally said. His parents are always involved in our decisions, always telling us how we should live. It's suffocating. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully, genuinely meaning it despite everything. The thing is, Jessica paused and I could hear her take a deep breath. The way they treat me sometimes reminds me of how I treated you. Like I'm not quite good enough, not quite fitting their expectations. The admission hung between us, fragile and significant. That sounds difficult, I said, echoing my response to Antoine months earlier, but with genuine empathy this time. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, Jessica continued. About the wedding, about how I let Antoine's family influence me, about how I hurt you. Yes, you did hurt me. I acknowledged, not to punish her, but to validate the truth we both needed to face. I know, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I needed to tell you that I understand now at least a little bit what it feels like to be judged for who you are instead of being valued for it. We talked for nearly an hour. Jessica shared how the Laurents' initial warm welcome had gradually transformed into constant criticism once she was officially part of their family. How Antoine, rather than supporting her, typically sided with his parents. How she'd begun to see the superficiality of the social world she had been so desperate to join. Would you be willing to meet when I'm back in the States next month? She asked tentatively as our conversation wound down. Just to talk. I understand if you're not ready. I considered the request carefully. The pain Jessica had caused was still real, but so was the glimmer of growth in her words today. Yes, I decided. I'd like that. 3 weeks later, we met at a quiet cafe halfway between my house and the airport. Jessica looked both familiar and changed the same features I'd known all her life, but with new shadows under her eyes and a wariness that hadn't been there before. Thank you for meeting me, she said as we sat down with our coffees. Thank you for reaching out, I replied. That couldn't have been easy. Jessica looked down at her cup. Nothing about these last few months has been easy, but I'm starting to think that's not always bad. Sometimes difficult things teach us what's really important. Our conversation that day was honest in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. Jessica admitted how she had been seduced by the Laurents' wealth and status, how she had gradually adopted their values and prejudices without questioning them. I was so focused on fitting into their world that I forgot to ask if it was even a world worth fitting into, she confessed. And the worst part is, I hurt the person who always supported me unconditionally. Why did you really ask me not to come to the wedding? I asked, needing to hear the truth directly from her. Jessica's face flushed with shame. Bernard made some comments about how having you there would make things awkward. He said things about your job, your background, and I didn't defend you. Instead, I started seeing you through his eyes. It was easier than admitting that someone I wanted to impress was being cruel to someone I loved. Her honesty was painful to hear, but necessary for both of us. Are you and Antoine going to try to work things out? I asked. Jessica sighed. I don't know. Part of me thinks we should. Another part wonders if we were ever right for each other in the first place. He's not a bad person, but he can't seem to separate himself from his parents' expectations any more than I could. Over the following months, Jessica and I cautiously rebuilt our relationship. We established new boundaries and patterns of interaction. I made it clear that while I loved her unconditionally, my support, emotional and financial, was not unlimited. She would need to take responsibility for her own choices and their consequences. Jessica, to her credit, seemed to understand. She began therapy to work through her issues around status validation and her tendency to seek approval from those who withheld it. She made efforts to reconnect with old friends she had discarded during her social climbing phase, and most importantly, she started treating me with the respect and appreciation that had been missing for too long. As for Antoine, their relationship continued, but with significant changes. Jessica insisted on moving out of his parents' orbit, taking an apartment in a different part of Paris, and limiting their involvement in the couple's daily decisions. Whether the marriage would survive these changes remained to be seen, but I was proud of Jessica for standing up for herself. The painful episode of the wedding and its aftermath had cost us both dearly. But from that rupture had come valuable lessons that might otherwise have taken a lifetime to learn or never been learned at all. For Jessica, the lesson was that true worth cannot be found in external validation or social status. For me, it was that love without self-respect is incomplete, and that sometimes the most loving action is to insist on being treated with dignity. These hard-won insights didn't erase the pain of what had happened, but they gave it meaning. They transformed a story of betrayal and hurt into one of growth and renewed understanding, not just between a father and daughter, but within ourselves. In the end, the most expensive wedding I never attended gave me something far more valuable than any ceremony could have: the reclamation of my sense of self-worth, and eventually a more authentic relationship with my daughter, built on mutual respect rather than obligation. To anyone watching this who feels taken for granted by those you love most, remember this. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to stand firm in your own dignity. It may cost you temporarily, but what you gain in self-respect is priceless. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Share your experience in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family relationships with dignity and grace. Thank you for listening, and remember, real love and respect go hand in hand. You cannot truly have one without the other.